On a cold Monday morning, January 6th, facing deadly poll numbers and even deadlier attacks within his own caucus, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced he would resign as Liberal leader and Prime Minister of Canada. It kicked off an 8-week leadership race to replace him. Who's our next Prime Minister? For a day, for a week, for however long until the new boss takes on the surging Conservative boss. A hell of a big job, and a short time to get there. Race to Replace is the limited pod series from Air Quotes Media, creators of Curse of Politics, The Hurly-Burly, and Hotel Pacifico, that chronicles the whole damn thing. Your hosts are 3 former key Trudeau staffers, Tyler Meredith, Dan Arnold, and Vandana Fatima Qatar. They'll break down the candidates, their strategies and comms, operations and ground game, platform ideas and polling numbers, how the race is changing week by week. And if you think this sounds like a Liberals only kind of thing, remember this: smart politicos keep their friends close and the opposition closer. Listeners, take your mark. Every week for the next 8 weeks, subscribe now to Race to Replace.
You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your 5-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome back, guests. Good to see you, Mike. Good to see you, Geoff.
Good to see you too, Kate.
Good day, Kate.
Today's discussion, we're going to talk about critical minerals, which seems to be on the lips of a lot of British Columbians lately, and raises the question, what the hell is a critical mineral anyway? We've got a guest today, Michael Goehring, CEO of the Mining Association of British Columbia, to help us explore that question and more. Michael has been CEO since 2019 after a long storied career as a public affairs consultant and partner at National Public Relations. He even did a tour of duty, I'm told. Mike, I think I heard this from you as a staffer at one point.
He was a staffer and an unreliable financial advisor to me.
There's a story there I hope we get to. Welcome to Hotel Pacifico, Michael.
Thank you very much. Pleased to be here.
Can you set us up a bit? I think mining has not always been the belle of the ball in BC. And I think lately has sort of emerged maybe as something as a bit of a belle. Certainly in the last election, we saw the NDP and the Conservatives embracing mining as an important part of their platform promises. Please help us, our listeners, and put into perspective to understand how important is mining to BC?
Well, good question, Kate. Good way to start things off. Mining helped build British Columbia. If you go back to your history books and your school books, Caribou Gold Rush, California Gold Rush, thousands of people came to British Columbia in search of gold. And they found lots of gold and many other vital minerals. And today, mining is a really important industry to British Columbia, and it's important to communities and important to people and prosperity all across the province. So, for example, in terms of the dollars, 2022, BC exported $18 billion worth of critical minerals and steelmaking coal. Right?
Well, where's that stack up among exporters, Michael? Where are you vis-a-vis other industries right now?
I kind of think we're actually ahead of forestry the last couple of years, just with forestry's decrease in the province. Mining has superseded forestry exports. Certainly, the dollar volume of gas and LNG is above that 18 billion, but there's huge room for growth and significant opportunity. In terms of BC, vis-a-vis Ontario and Quebec, we're right there. And a lot of people don't know this, but BC really is a global mining center, right? Downtown.
So you've got people downtown who are working in Africa, South America. I mean, there's a lot of expertise here, right?
Tons of expertise. We have innovated and developed mining techniques, milling techniques that are used all over the world. And we have a huge supply chain of mining suppliers. They sell some 3.7 billion worth of goods and services to British Columbia's 17 operating mines and 2 smelters on an annual basis. Many of those companies now export that expertise and those services and goods all across the world. So it's
How
a
many
going
jobs,
concern.
Michael? How many jobs? And tell me, they're well paid too, right?
Mining jobs in British Columbia, the average wage is 142,000 annually. It's one of the highest paying jobs in British Columbia. The sector at this time supports more than 35,000 jobs.
Yeah,
in
that's
BC.
very important.
So very, very important. And I guess, where we are today is kind of starting in 2017, 2018, actually under then President Trump. Canada and the US started to look at supply chains and started to ask the question, what supply chains are we vulnerable in? They looked at pharmaceuticals, they looked at microchips, they looked at minerals and metals, and they determined that, in fact, North America is vulnerable with respect to, some 3 or 4 dozen different minerals. These came to be referred to as critical minerals. And these are minerals that are indispensable to decarbonization, to the transition to a clean economy globally. Copper. Without copper, you can't have wind turbines. You can't have electric vehicles. You can't have electric vehicle batteries. Lithium, cobalt, nickel, etc. Canada has a rich resource endowment of critical minerals, and BC does as well. And additionally, what's important too is those critical minerals, not only are they important for decarbonization, they're also important for defense and security industries. Obviously high technology, and critical communication. So these minerals and metals are deemed critical. They're highly prized, and I made reference to 2017 or 2018. Now BC, Canada and the United States have a joint action plan for critical mineral collaboration. We've identified the fact that there's a need for North American critical mineral supply chain.
So can you talk about, so actually I want to start there too, just so that to be clear, the critical mineral thing, like that's like a capital C, capital N, there's a proper noun defined list of what there is, or is there any kind of like debate about who falls onto that list or what falls onto that list and what falls off it?
Good question, Kate. No, it's quite clear. The government of Canada has a list of 35 critical minerals. And in BC, we have or produce 16 of the critical minerals on Canada's list.
Can we talk then about, because I was interested about this partly because I did see is it germanium, the one that Jonathan Wilkinson keeps bringing up as the example in the tariff discussion. So, and I want to bring this one up because I think it's kind of interesting. It's a critical mineral that's important to fiber optics, as I understand it, right? So communications, probably also some defense related elements. But the supply chain itself, we are a producer of germanium related to some zinc mining in Alaska. Can you tell me more about this and how BC fits into some of these supply chains?
Sure. It's a great story. Teck Resources, which owns the Trail smelter in beautiful Trail, British Columbia on the Columbia River, is in partnership with the Inupiat tribes in Alaska with a mine called the Red Dog zinc mine. It's one of the largest zinc mines in the world. It's a fantastic mine. They produce zinc ore in Alaska. It gets shipped down to the port of Vancouver. It gets loaded on a train and goes to Trail, BC, where it is refined in Teck's storied lead zinc smelter. And that germanium along with gallium, lead, and zinc, is then exported into the United States of America. So it's a great supply chain story, where you have a lead zinc ore that's extracted in the U.S., processed in Canada, and then exported for use across numerous uses in the U.S.
I'm having trouble envisioning this slogan, though, that if in the coming trade war, it's like hands off our germanium. Is that where
Yeah.
we're going here? Hands like
Yeah, like
we're
what's
not getting.
yeah.
Our cold dead hands are holding on to this germanium.
Or is it
I
our
think we need another one.
germanium or
I'm
their
going to go with
germanium?
copper.
You know, what's really interesting is, so I mentioned this partnership that we have with the United States. It was started under President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau. We'll see if it continues under soon-to-be President Trump. But it, again, is all about creating a North American critical mineral supply chain. Well, why is that important? Well, why it's important is because China and Russia, to a lesser extent, have a stranglehold on the extraction and processing of a number of critical minerals. And after some of the activities that China has undertaken globally, and Russia's war with Ukraine, the United States and our other allies all said to each other, we cannot afford to be dependent on these countries for these critical mineral supplies. We need to, what they refer to as onshore. We need to onshore the extraction and the processing of these critical minerals, because without them, we won't have a modern economy. We can't decarbonize. I mean, we're putting billions of dollars into EV factories and EV battery factories in the east of the U.S. and Canada, and so all that, a lot of activity is taking place on that. In Canada, countries are looking to Canada as a leader to be a responsible supplier of these critical minerals. And British Columbia has a significant part to play in that. And where the pinches come in is just recently, China has placed an export ban on critical minerals and rare earths, including germanium and gallium, which makes Teck and their trail smelter exports of germanium and gallium very valuable to the U.S. If you don't have an alternate source of a commodity or a material, when someone is no longer willing to provide you with it, you're in significant trouble, right?
Well, maybe we do have a slogan with germanium then, after all, by the sounds
I think
of it.
we do, Mike. So, but when you think of the fact that Canada exports some 80 billion in minerals and metals annually, and about half of that goes to the U.S. In this current situation we find ourselves in with the incoming Trump administration, we do have some positive leverage. And whether President-elect Trump understands that, I'm sure people around him do. He doesn't mention it. He also doesn't mention the significant amounts of oil and gas that Canada exports, and not to mention timber, right? So it's very important. And again, British Columbians, I think, don't realize the opportunity that we have in this province to be a responsible global supplier of critical minerals.
But can I just take you up on that point, Michael? Because this week, of course, is the resource forum in Prince George. Mining is going to be a big focus. The EB government's created a standalone mining ministry, which I think not the first time, but first time in a long time. And we had a previous guest on the show, Marin Smith, who talked about the possibility of 15 or 16 properties being close to development and was advocating for for the government to do everything in its power to get at least some of them operating. Is that the kind of discussion you're having with Victoria? And how optimistic are you that some of the things that she was proposing, for example, could actually come to pass?
Well, let me set out what we do have in BC right now, Geoff, is we have 17 critical mineral projects in varying degrees of maturity, development maturity. The construction, if those 17 projects were all to, kind of get a green light and a final investment decision, the investment needed to build those projects would be some $36 billion, right? High stakes. These are large, capital-intensive, complex projects. The labor income that would be generated, dollars into the workforce in BC would be some $13 billion, which is quite, an economic injection into British Columbia. And I believe the tax revenue would be somewhere around, I think, 15 or 16 billion dollars just over the 3 to 4 years of construction. So there's a lot at stake.
Before you get to any resource rents, because resource rents still carry a huge part of the financial activity of the province, forestry, mining, and so on. So that's the kind of impact before we even talk about what might be available to government revenues to support other services.
Indeed.
But I'm wondering what you're watching now, because, I think the consensus, and Daniel Smith's fresh off a trip to Florida to confirm, that these tariffs are coming, that the Trump administration is pretty dug in on this. And can you help me understand, thinking of those 17 projects that, like, even if the stars have finally aligned and there seems to be consensus, multi-partisan consensus around the need to move permitting more quickly, if we do move into this tariff war, then the kind of raising capital becomes an entirely different struggle. So what are you in the association watching about this tariff battle, and what's next?
Well, raising capital in the mining sector right now, leaving aside Trump and potential tariffs, is difficult and has been for some time. And what we see is the fact that capital and the markets are impatient. And insofar as Canada goes, and BC is in this bucket, is included here, they need to see a line of sight with some certainty. This is the challenge we face. You're going into a permitting process, and there's no real certainty right now in Canada when that permitting process will conclude. There's a lot of duplication, and it takes much too long to permit a project. So that's one thing. With respect to, and I think we'll get back to that, with respect to Trump and the potential for tariffs. It's an existential threat to the Canadian economy, and so all bets are off. And some economists are saying we could be plunged into a recession, immediately. So I think on that, it's one day at a time. I hope that and want to see the premiers come together in a united front, not to light their hair on fire, to work together and work with allies in the U.S. business community, in labor, governors and Congress persons and senators whose economies would be directly impacted by these tariffs and by countervailing tariffs from Canada.
You've been around this space for a while. I'm curious what you think about what's the tack to take with Donald Trump, because I think you said it yourself. There definitely are people around him who understand the implications, the sort of, what's the word, mutually assured self-destruction that could come in the critical mineral space. But he's different. So are there any political leaders you're what? Yeah. What do you Are there any political leaders you see taking the right tack, or any stances you'd like to see, particularly the premiers, take more clearly in how they handle Trump?
I mean, Trump is certainly a disruptor, and we'll see, how much of there's a lot of smoke and, how much fire is there as well, right? Look, what I know is if you look back over the decades at Canada-US relations, when we have had, conflict in various issue areas, economic issues and environmental issues, if Canada is willing to withstand some pain in a dispute, we actually can come out of it not too bad. We actually win at times. We have leverage, right? We do have leverage. The problem is the United States is much more important to Canada than Canada is to the US. It's an asymmetrical relationship. So, but there are areas where we can exert power. We have economic power. Oil and gas, we certainly do. Critical minerals, we do. Forestry, we do. I'm sure there's a few others as well. But so what that means to me is be strategic, come together. There needs to be a full-throated execution for Canadians to engage with and push the U.S. on the potential for these tariffs.
You mentioned permitting a few minutes ago, Michael, and there's been a lot of discussion about that with the Premier raising it as a priority, especially since the election, but he was talking about it before then as well. What is your analysis of where this issue lies? Because, I mean, I hear various things where, permitting is less of a problem for some proponents who really have their ducks in a row at the beginning, have a good First Nation arrangement right out of the gate. Others can bog down on environmental issues and other complexities. Do you have a prescription for this that would, I guess, improve not just the substance of the permitting, but also the perception that BC is a good place to do business?
Well, the perception out there is, generally speaking, BC is a safe, stable jurisdiction. People really want to do business here. In our sector, and I'll stick to mining, it's what I know best, but the view is that it's difficult to get things done. Notwithstanding, Mike, a few examples where projects have moved quite relatively quickly. I would say important to nod the hat to the government of BC, Cisco, and their Caribou Gold project. They were the first ones through the revised Environmental Assessment Act. They received their Mines Act permit relatively quickly. I mean, they got through in 5 or so years. So very good. It's a brownfield site. It's underground, so it's not a larger greenfield surface mine, which is much more complex and challenging to permit. But on the whole, it takes much too much time, and there's much too uncertainty in permitting. And look, the government of BC has conveyed the willingness to make changes, and Geoff would know this. I mean, it was expediting permitting was a mandate in the mandate letter of 2 previous ministers. It was a topic of discussion in the Mining Jobs Task Force and their final report going back to 2018. Permitting was identified as a challenge. And the question now is, well, there was the willingness, are we going to see action? That's what we need to see now. And I think if the government of British Columbia is able to communicate to the mining industry, to communities, to nations, that it's willing to roll up its sleeves and come together and work on this, then and communicate that, markets and investors will respond in kind.
Michael, I think you struck on an important point there, because I do recall from my time in government, all the work in this area. And one of the questions you put to us as we were about to come on the air is sort of relevant here. Do people support mining, or do they not? Is an important startup question. I can support mining. Doesn't mean I support every single mine. And a permitting process, I think, is exactly that. It protects everybody, including the superior miners, from substandard performance that leads to, environmental problems and cleanup costs and all of that kind of stuff. And that's why I'm fascinated in the discussion now, whether you think, we just saw Adrian Dix announce a bunch of wind farms, clearly very different from a mine, but no EA process at all. And so I think that would raise it in my mind if I was working on a mineral property. Well, how will that play out for me? He's so positive about the possibility of green energy production that there's no EA process for wind farms. He's not saying that won't be the case for a hydro dam or for, maybe down the road a nuclear reactor or something. But is your industry going forward saying, okay, that kind of attitude is encouraging to us and we want to see more of that in our sector? Or, and is it more about getting to an outcome in a consistent period of time, or more about getting the positive outcome? Because I think that's where the public starts to worry.
It is definitely about getting to an outcome in a certain period of time.
Mm-hmm. That's what I heard.
And if you're not going to get, yes, please let us know. Right? Mines are multi-billion-dollar complex, capital projects. And it's hard to raise capital out there. And people, if it's not a go, then the regulator needs to let you know. Right.
I think a major mine will probably spend, I don't know, hundreds of millions of dollars in the permitting process itself before they even get to shovels in the ground, would you say?
Oh, easily. Yeah. It's not for the faint of heart. We're not, Geoff, you raised the issue of kind of exempting those wind projects from the EA. Some people have said, well, there's just going to be no permitting then. This is crazy. Well, actually, there is, and I believe it's called the Land Act, and it's pretty rigorous in and of itself, right? Believe me, there's nothing that's getting built in this province without some kind of permitting process, right? There's no free lunch here. I think what Minister Dix's decision did was say, we're willing to look outside of the box here and find a way to speed things up. Now, I would say, and I'm not trying to be cheeky, but it is interesting. I don't know if this is more a case of necessity as much as virtue, because BC Hydro and the province are holding the bag for that power, and they don't want brownouts or issues, right? But the point is they're willing to look at that, and hats off to that. That's great. The Mining Association of BC and the industry is not asking to be exempted from the environmental assessment process.
But at the same token, you really need more power too, because mines are energy hungry projects.
Oh, we do. Yeah, no, I mean, don't get me wrong. We support what they're doing. That's great. We have among the lowest GHG intensive mines in the world here in British Columbia. They are clean, and we depend on that clean power. But what we are and what we've been asking the government of British Columbia, and we're very pleased to have received kind of bipartisan support for our ask during the recent election, is we're asking the government to roll up its sleeves and speed up the process. This isn't a cut red tape. This is not get rid of regulation. This is, for goodness sakes, we have to do better. And those who question that, look at all the effort that Premier Eby has put into housing, right? And the long drawn out bureaucratic permitting process for housing. It's enough to, you want to pull your hair out, right? And that is taking place sector by sector by sector. And why would BC Hydro and the Crown want to exempt those projects from the EA? Because they need to have that power in a certain time frame. We all depend on that power. So obviously, we're not prepared just to enter into the EA process is viewed. There's a lot of uncertainty there, and we can't afford to have those projects not come online when we need the power. So we're going to exempt it.
It's like a podcast. You just need to do like 1.5 speed.
Yeah.
Or 2 times speed.
Exactly.
Depends on who's speaking.
Look, engineers can do, when it comes to building a mine and managing environmental impacts, et cetera, engineers can do great stuff, right? Part of the challenge of permitting is the soft skills, right? Engaging with communities, engaging with nations, going through multiple question and answer sets with stakeholders, and then with the regulator. So there must be a way for rational people to say, you know what, this isn't scary. We can do this better and faster and still protect the environment and deliver on an opportunity before it goes away and moves to another jurisdiction, which is what could happen.
Yeah. I'm remembering too, there was in the Conservative platform in October, there was a promise in speeding up permitting for mines to do away with some of the more ambiguous requirements. I can't remember what exactly the language they used were. And I remember reading it and kind of assuming they were talking to some of the more relational pieces because they can be, in terms of arriving at resolution, a little more ambiguous. But are there is that what they mean? Or are there other things that are in the process that are sort of hard to bring to resolution because the criteria can feel ambiguous?
There are some 11 pieces of federal legislation governing a new mine development, some 10 pieces of provincial legislation, and under each piece of legislation are cascading regulations and requirements. I use this visual often for people to understand, and that is when you bring your binders with your project description and application into the environmental assessment office, you do it in a wheelbarrow, and the binders probably are about 20 to 25 feet high. That's how rigorous the ask is of someone who wants to develop a mine in British Columbia, right? So there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of moving pieces. And, we've made some specific recommendations to government, and we hope that they will work with us and listen to those. And they're based on our subject matter experts and experience in the field here in BC and around the world.
So a few years on now, since the passage of the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, where is MABC on it? Has it been a help, a hindrance? Do you want to see changes? Do you want to see it go away? Is it okay? Is there a veto? Well, all the easy questions, Mike.
That was a question that I think Mike asked the Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation in 2024. What answer did you get, Mike?
From Murray Rankin?
Yes.
I think it was qualified.
It did not, had some media training, I think.
The Mining Association of BC and our members supported UNDRIP, and we still do. And we support partnerships and economic reconciliations with First Nations. In fact, the mining industry has been, held a leadership position in partnering and collaborating with First Nations all across BC. You will not see a new mine built in British Columbia without some form of partnership and collaboration with a nation or nations. And that's the reality we live in. And to be honest, one of the reasons why I took this role on back in 2019 was the opportunity to actually make some positive change. I see, mining is kind of the industry, aside from forestry, but one of the industries where there's huge opportunities for economic reconciliation, right? Mines aren't in downtown Vancouver. They're up in the northeast of BC, central British Columbia, up in the Tahltan region in northwest BC. And the economic benefits through IBAs and participation agreements and employment with Indigenous peoples are significant. What I will say, though, I will add, and First Nations are not a challenge, but the permitting process and some of the requirements for Indigenous referrals in the permitting process gum things up. And we need to come together with nations and the regulator and kind of look at some of these things and determine what's high risk and what's no risk. And perhaps if there's no risk, do we really need to have some of these referrals, right? The other issue, and this is something that we've been very vocal about, is that, a lot of nations do not have the governance technical capacity in-house to deal with that 25-foot high stack of permit applications, right? You go in and you talk to a chief, and the chief says, well, I got some other burning issues to deal with here. I don't have the in-house capacity to review this. What do you want me to do? You want it turned around within the year? It's not going to happen. So one of the things that we have been advocating for is the Crown has an obligation, we believe, to provide the support and funding to build and enhance First Nations governance, administrative, and technical capacity so that they're on a level playing field, right? And that they can manage this stuff on their terms. The Crown really outsourced consultation to the private sector some time ago, but we think if, we know where these projects are in British Columbia, and this isn't germane just to mining, why are we not providing this capacity to these nations in advance and starting to build it up, right? To me, that just makes sense. We've gone so far as to say there should be a kind of a shared services organization developed and run by nations where there's, environmental, engineering, legal, administrative expertise that works with nations across the province, right? So that they can participate. They can participate in the economy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause you have First Nations with less than 300 people in a lot of cases, with small administrations. You can even take that further, Michael, to small rural communities generally, because on permitting, on housing and things like that, capacity is a big issue to get anything done. So there we are. We will take up the torch of shared services.
Very good.
Yeah, I think it's a
carry your
Hotel
message
Pacifico
forward
first.
into the
You
future
got all
confidently.
three of us nodding vigorously, which I don't know if has happened before. So congratulations.
First, germanium.
Yeah.
Second, shared services.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we got some winners here.
And, we will not make the progress we need to make unless we provide that support to nations as well, right? You can't kind of decouple the two, and not, you have to decouple and deal with both of those things in order to make progress. That's critical, right?
Michael, we're going to have to stay in touch because I am very curious to see what the next few months hold with the incoming administration. I mean, I'm going to say maybe even the next few weeks. But I really enjoyed this conversation. Actually, I've learned a lot today. And I was glad to nod with my co-hosts in unison for the first time. Thank you for that little gift. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
All mining positive, Michael. No problem.
Guests, I moved to BC 5 years ago from Ontario, and one of the things I've come to appreciate is all the small ways we do things differently here. The way us locals show that we're local, that we are of BC. Some things are obvious, like the way we embrace rain gear and how grown men and women wear adult-sized splash pants to the office. It rains here all the time, but we don't complain about the weather. We complain about ferry delays and the lineups at Seventh Heaven. Sometimes it's more subtle, more values-based, like how we embrace mountain views, but not always the advice of dentists to put fluoride in the drinking water. And milk comes in a plastic jug or carton, not a plastic bag. That's too Ontario, like the Maple Leafs, and Drake. From the very beginning, Hotel Pacifico's presenting sponsor TELUS has been of and for BC. 20 years ago, their first office in the Brian Canfield Centre in Burnaby was affectionately known as The Boot, an obvious reference to a Blundstone. And TELUS has stayed true to their BC roots and commitment to community ever since. It shows up in things like the $18.5 billion in investments in network infrastructure, operations, and spectrum TELUS has committed across BC over 3 years. After years of supporting reforestation efforts, TELUS just planted their 1 millionth tree. That's a total equivalent of 20,000 acres of forest and an area 20 times the size of Vancouver's Stanley Park. When British Columbians partner with TELUS, that is an investment that comes back to our communities through jobs, infrastructure, community giving, and government revenue. When TELUS wins, BC wins. Because we're all in this together. Even Drake. Maybe we should send him some splash pants.
Hello. You've reached the Hotel Pacifico Strategy Suite.
I'm just going to say, I think we're going to be talking to Michael again in the near future. I'll be curious to, as this tariff issue. Yeah, lots of content.
What's going on in mining? Yeah,
provincial government moving on it. Mandate letters potentially coming out tomorrow, I think we're hearing.
Mhm.
So we're recording on Tuesday. We're recording on Tuesday, are we? Yes.
No, we're recording on Monday right now.
Monday. Thank you, sir.
This is Monday.
God.
Tomorrow is Tuesday. Tuesday comes after Monday.
That's the week I'm having. Thank you, Mike McDonald. Yeah. Okay. So Tuesday, potentially they'll come out. We'll maybe have some more insight into where that's going, but probably some good excuses to come back to Michael.
See what impact the green discussions had on the mandate. If we can tell, we may not be able to tell.
Yeah, exactly. So
like
let's
invisible green ink.
All right.
Oh, snap, Mike McDonald. All
when
right.
you get listeners, when you print off the mandate letters on your dot matrix printer, put lemon juice on it, and then you might see
and
the
then
invisible ink.
that'll eliminate
Potentially
more overt than there, but we'll
That
see.
should work.
We shall see. Let's talk about the Conservatives for a second, because John Resta was out with a media conference last week where he brought forward allegations of election irregularities in Surrey Guildford, where that tight 22 vote result happened. And I think, so if I've got this right, so John Resta says the party say they have evidence of 45 questionable votes. And then the Conservative candidate in that riding has made an official complaint to BC Elections, and I think they have, Elections BC, and they have confirmed that it's under review. I would love to spend a little more time just understanding this, because I want to say at the outset, in a tight result like that, 22 votes, of course it makes sense to spend some time looking really closely at every vote. But can we talk a little bit about what the party has surfaced in terms of, I think there were two allegations. One is sort of a home for people who are recovering, I think, from addiction and mental health, maybe some mental health recovery, who are saying that they were handed over, that their votes were influenced. And then I think the other one is something about non-citizens voting, which I don't understand the mechanics of how that allegation would come forward. Do either of you have had insight into sort of where this surfaces an issue or how you would investigate it?
Well, I guess
Go ahead, Mike. Go.
Well, I was just saying, I guess the Conservatives came across information that to them seemed a little fishy. And, this was the 47th seat won by the NDP, the one that hung in the balance for a week or two after Election Day. And so there would have probably been a lot more rigor in terms of going and looking at the, they went through a recount, and they must have, I'm guessing they discovered things through the extra work that they did, understanding the recount and all that stuff. So, I think on one hand, if there's information that looks dodgy and you've got concerns about it, absolutely bring it forward to Elections BC and the courts. That's the process. It's there for these situations. I understand there's I think a 3-month deadline to bring these
That's right. Yeah.
this information forward. So they're just getting under the wire here. But I've been hearing murmurs about this since December, and so they've been working on it for a while. And they there they go. They're out. They're off and running with it now. I'm not exactly clear why they needed to load in asking for an inquiry into the management of the entire election by Elections BC, and kind of loading in the effect of David Eby's amendments to the Election Act and so forth. I mean, to me, the issue is, was Surrey Guildford a just outcome? And is there enough evidence there to warrant a by-election to do it over again? And that's, to me, that is the issue. I think Conservatives are trying to make a bit more hay out of it. I think it detracts a bit from the issue of Surrey Guildford, though, when they throw in a whole bunch of other stuff into it.
Oh, we saw in the Eleanor Sturkle thing what seemed to be kind of straightforward, where she made some criticisms. A group of caucus members felt otherwise, and Rustad was pretty quick to give them some assistance. And this issue, Aisha Esty, who was the party president, and I think Angela Zadoro, who was the campaign manager, and John Rustad were at pains to say they thought that Elections BC had generally done a good job with the count. They were there for it. They saw the judicial recount. They made a lot of positive statements. But I think I agree with you, Mike, that if they found evidence, even what some may say was flimsy, that ballots were inappropriately influenced or that vulnerable people were manipulated to achieve an outcome they may not have wished, that bears a review. I don't think it needs an independent investigation necessarily. So at this point, the NDP said, well, there can be an all-party committee look at these things, as I guess fairly broad brush. And of course, Elections BC will take another look. And now we're going to see this attempt in court to pry the door open a bit further. So I think it's reasonable opposition politics, but I don't think at the end of the day it's going to make much difference.
Well, it could be more than just opposition politics, though, because if the evidence they've brought forward is material, it could lead to offenses under the Election Act too for individuals. So,
oh no, I think it should be pursued and taken seriously.
Serious business, right? Like, but it's the proof will be in the pudding.
I think the NDP's a bit off kilter in part of the response, because I don't know that John Rustad is asserting conspiracy theories or anything like that. He's asking for an investigation of this, and there are maybe parallels in the minds of some people with what happens in the States, but I don't think they fit very well here. So I agree. Anytime you think there's a problem with the process, shine light on it. See what you find.
So Attorney General Nikki Sharma, she kind of poured some cold water on it in the media when she was asked about it. And my historical understanding of attorney generals is like, if anything is coming near the courts, just stay away from it.
Yeah, I read her transcript. I don't think she said anything that was over.
Okay, well, I saw something on TV and I was like, oh, maybe she went a little further than I would have gone if I were AG, but then I'm not a lawyer, so there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think there's an important distinction here, and I think so far the Conservatives are on the right side of the distinction. But it's one thing to say, okay, here's a bunch of questions we have, some evidence of some around some votes and some voting, versus the sort of like, well, the system is corrupt or the system is broke. Like, they're very different courses, and they're clearly in camp one right now. And I think in a close election, that's actually a really important thing to do, or a close vote, close riding. That's a really important thing to do. But it's one to watch, because I think maybe where the temptation is to see it as something different is there are online in particular people who are veering more into that question the system, trust nothing, conspiratorial space.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's look ahead, because I think last week we did a lot of, as we are wont to do, a lot of retrospective looking back. Let's look forward. Let's look into 2025. And I want to start with you, Geoff, asking about this next year, this first year of a 4-year mandate. What does success look like for the BC NDP and David Eby?
Well, it hasn't been much talked about, and I look back to Carol Taylor's famous bargaining round. I think it was in 2002 or something like that, maybe a bit later.
2000,
where she offered a bonus and got a deal with the public service.
Yeah.
I think a huge
2005,
win.
2006, yeah.
Yeah, a bit later. Okay. But the principle's the same. It would be a fantastic outcome if Brenda Bailey was able to say, I've asked the public service unions to come to the table. We're trying to get a deal by March 31st, which is the expiry date. That in the face of the tariff threats, the risk of a recession that implies, the commitment of this government to protect services, that we do a collective agreement that to the largest degree possible protects services and jobs and is consistent with the province's financial capacity. The worst thing that could happen is that the reverse occurs and there's some kind of a public sector strike. But I think trying to get a comprehensive deal and a pattern set early that was consistent with some of the fiscal objectives of the government would be fantastic. I haven't heard anywhere that that's about to happen, but that would be a terrific thing if it did unfold. Good idea. You can have it for free.
All right, Mike, let's pivot to the Conservatives then. And John Rustad and his class of legislative freshmen, in this first year, they're frosh here. Yeah, fresh people.
Fresh people.
Freshies, frosh. They're frosh. What do they want this year?
Well, I think if we're sitting here in December, I hope we are, and we're looking back on the year, I think the Conservatives will be happy if they've had a good opposition run in terms of, nailing the government on some issues, keeping the government off balance, and that there's a sense of cohesion with the Conservative caucus, like that everyone's expecting a bit of a bumpy start. There's a lot of inexperience there. There's a lot of strong personalities. But if they're being molded into a fighting force that is more unified than divided, that is confidently taking on the free enterprise mantle in British Columbia, and murmurs from moderates in the middle are less and less, I think that's a darn good year for them. But it's as we sit here in January, that's a big question mark as to what's going to happen with this group once they hit the legislature prime time in February. Mm-hmm. How is John Rustad going to navigate? Is he, by next year, this time, is he sending a signal that he will lead them into the next election, 2028? Or are they transitioning to something different by then? We don't know.
Mm. What about the Greens? Like after everyone's tested the mandate letters with lemon juice, Mike.
Yes.
Aside from the secret writing, though, like what evidence could we see of success for the Greens? What would that look like?
Well, I'm not exactly sure what we have with these two MLAs yet, but on the surface of it, they seem like
they're different.
They have a lot of potential to punch above the weight of a two-member caucus.
Mm-hmm.
And I go back, and Geoff, you and I have seen over the years the independent MLAs or small caucuses can have a big difference. We can look at Adam Olsen, Sonia. We can look at further back Jack Weisgerber and David Mitchell. These are all MLAs that were heard from and had a unique voice in the legislature at their time. Problem was that they weren't always able to grow much further than that. But I do think Jeremy rhymes with chariot, Valeriot, and Rob Botterill are educated guys who are there, have strong views on certain issues, and might be able to occupy some of that middle ground voters who are floating around disaffected with the realignment of the landscape. Depends how it goes.
Yeah, I think they need to pick their battles, both in terms of what they attack the government on and what they decide to extract from the government, and try for once, which has not been a strong suit of the Green Party of BC, to find an issue that actually resonates with voters. So it may be an environmental question that is a broad concern, not just a very narrow local community concern, where they go after the government and try to get something. I don't know. Or it could be some change in policy or some scare they pulled during the budget. But they need to make themselves relevant because this agreement, in my view, is a hand extended to lift them out of the political grave. They didn't get there by a big margin, and they needed to figure out a way to be more political and less policy oriented, and I mean the correct balance of those two things. So.
Yeah.
The great advantage they've got is they don't have to go to caucus meetings. They could just go have coffee.
Yeah.
And it really, it's important to have good process with a large caucus, but it slows you down. And these guys will be more nimble, they'll be more flexible, and that's why if they're smart, they'll get their licks in more than their numbers warrant.
They have to have a good time, and neither of them is the leader. So they got to get along. They got to find a division of labor, and they've got to enjoy that division of labor and make the most of it. I think Mike's absolutely right. The ability to be nimble, I haven't seen any of it yet, but Andrew Weaver,
Yeah.
for all of
They've been
his
quiet so far.
sharp edges, was
Maybe
very,
they're
very
picking their
good with
battles.
tweet and all that kind of stuff.
So just to cap off on the Greens, we don't talk about the Greens much, but here we are today. If we're sitting here a year from now, I think another successful outcome for the year would be to settle the leadership question for them. If Sonia's sticking around for the long term, they need to have a way that it makes it work and that it's actually functioning properly to have a leader outside the legislature, or she's resolved to move on and one of those two gentlemen take on the leadership. So that remains to be seen.
Good point. Well, just to say, I mean, I think prognostication is not in BC politics, not a very successul pursuit.
Hazardous, very hazardous.
Yeah, hazardous, let's say, because January, like this time last year, I don't think any of us we were talking about, the NDP kind of holding the course and what type of margins they were walking to. I think we were sort of,
I plead for listeners not to go back to listen to
Don't
my
you dare.
forecast of the 5 ridings to watch. Please don't go back and watch that. The 5 closest ridings. Please do not. Please.
Yeah,
We should erase that. Get a big magnet out for that episode and erase it from YouTube.
Yeah. We were not predicting BC United to implode in any fantastic fashion. There's a bunch of stuff. So anyway, listeners, just take it all with a grain of salt.
Exactly. What about
right.
BC United though? What happens? What's a good year for them?
What is a good year for them? I mean, to still be
run.
around, to
A long-standing supporter left over $1 million in his or her will to BC United. They can pay off the creditors
actually,
and quietly
well, no,
exit.
they'll need like 1,000 people to die and leave $1,400 at a time.
I guess so. That's right.
Yeah.
Damn.
But they might
That's
end
a
up
lot.
like they might end up like the ghosts in Harry Potter, just flying around Hogwarts, interacting with everybody, but not necessarily there. So maybe it'd be nearly headless Kevin.
Yeah, on their
Or,
best days, they're like a poltergeist wreaking a little havoc, but like not really. Yeah. Yeah.
But a good year for them is that they've got past the debts that they have, and they have a plan, whether it's a plan to live or a plan to die.
Well, I think we could say for all the parties that the air will be sucked out of the room by the imminent federal election and the battle to come with Trump and the tariffs and so on. And so if there was a time to have a problem that was hard to solve, it's now, whoever you are on the legislature benches.
Exactly. It's not a bad year to be a large freshman class of a new party and a new political force, actually. All right, let's go grab a drink.
Gas or electric? How about all of the above? Lately, I've been talking about how much we rely upon our province's gas and electric systems working together. We need both systems working together to safely, reliably, and affordably meet the needs of British Columbians. And if you're a FortisBC customer that qualifies, you can have all of the above, gas and electric. FortisBC has introduced a new rebate of $10,000 or more for eligible customers who replace their home's older gas heating systems with an electric heat pump and high-efficiency furnace. Speaking for myself, I like myself a good heat pump, especially when paired with a high-efficiency furnace. How's it work? A dual fuel system provides whole home heating and cooling and is a good option for homeowners who are replacing an aging gas furnace and want to upgrade to a reliable and efficient system, keeping their home comfortable year-round. It includes an electric heat pump for cooling during warm weather and space heating during milder conditions, and a high-efficiency gas furnace for heating in colder weather. So just like our provincial energy systems, you get the advantages of both gas and electric at the household level to ensure your home energy remains affordable, efficient, and reliable. Kind of like a hybrid car, gas and electric. Sidebar, my first car was a 72 Volkswagen Bug that ran on leaded gas. That sucker was no hybrid. Anyways, the new rebate is part of FortisBC's commitment to offer the next generation of rebates for high-efficiency technologies and systems to help achieve provincial climate action goals by harnessing the strengths of both energy systems. Find a full list of rebates and energy efficiency information at fortisbc.com/rebates. FortisBC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast.
Let's raise a glass or take a shot. Time to raid the minibar.
Geoff, you going to kick us off?
I'm going to take a shot at Mayor Ken Sim, and I'm not it'll sound initially like a civic issue, but I don't think it is. They're both got provincial dimensions. One is the collapse of the Vancouver Art Gallery project, where it is said that $60 million was spent. If that's the case, I have no reason to doubt it, then at least $50 million of that was provincial funds that were transferred over during Gordon Campbell's time. And we haven't heard from the mayor yet what will happen next with the Vancouver Art Gallery, because the city of Vancouver owns the collection and provided an entire 2/3 of a city block for the development. And recent coverage suggests that it's not at all clear what will happen next, but it's not a small issue. And the mayor, who wanted to get our swagger back, I think needs to be on the scene more on that one. Secondly, this recent announcement by Concord Pacific that it's finally going to develop the last section of the Expo lands, which they purchased in 1990 for $320 million. The amount was debated. Also, an amazing development, potentially transformative of that last rotten piece of asphalt, will be billions of dollars of private sector real estate investment in 5,000 homes, although probably not homes that any of us could afford to buy. Again, nothing from the mayor on that, although we see that the elimination of view cones led to a doubling of the height of the towers there. So these are, the province will be responsible for cleanup of contaminated soil there. Was the province's land. The province is still owed money on the final calculation and a back-end payment on that. So hopefully the mayor is on the case there and is somewhere where I can't see him doing a good job to make sure this comes to a happy conclusion.
Geoff has an excellent Substack on that, Lotus Land. Check it out, listeners, if you want to learn more. Mike.
I don't know where Geoff gets all this time to write.
I know. Like,
he's writing up a storm.
Yeah.
I don't have time
That's
to
why I've
read
been
it.
pent up on this front for a while now.
Sheesh.
I just think Terry Huey and Concord Pacific should do what they said in 1988 and be finished by 2003. That was almost 20 years ago. It's not too much to ask. So let's carry on.
Where would Cirque du Soleil go?
Well, Jeez. I know. That's a huge promise. What about the viaducts? Never mind. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Geoff. Yeah, I'm going to take a gentle shot today at BC Conservative transport critic Harman Bangu. On Christmas Day, or maybe it was Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, he put out a tweet attacking BC Ferries and the NDP government for the ferry cancellations and decried the lack of infrastructure. And I'm thinking, like, what infrastructure would be worthwhile to have during a major windstorm on the Georgia Strait? Like, what are we looking for? Super tankers, aircraft carriers? I'm not sure how they get through Active Pass. So I'm thinking, like, I appreciate the enthusiasm of especially new critics who got the memo, attack. You know, be seen. He was seen by me, anyways. And we've heard others say, watch this guy. He's got to watch in the Conservatives, and I don't doubt that. But I'll just say, you know, sometimes it's like, first of all, it's Christmas, but secondly, it's like, well, what do you want? You know? So anyways, generally I'd say for critics, you should bang away, and you're not always going to get it right every time. And it's good to bang away. But on this particular one, I was like, maybe that's a bit much.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. That's a good one.
Lots of wind.
Lots of wind. All kinds of wind. I just wanted to give a shout out, raise my glass to the Super Scoopers. Early this morning, I was watching a fantastic clip on Fox News celebrating the Canadian Victoria made. I think it's Victoria and Calgary where they're made. Super Scoopers who are down in LA.
What are you talking to? Oh, the firefighters. I thought you were talking about going to the dog. I thought you were talking about going to the dog park.
Yeah, me too. I wasn't sure where we were going with this.
Where are you going with this?
They're with me. No, they're not with me. Okay, no, planes that scoop up the water and fight the fires. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Is that what we call Super Scoopers?
Yes.
Okay.
What do I meant to call them?
Yeah.
Well, that's good. I just
water bombers.
You're talking about dog poo.
I raised my glass to dog poo scoopers. No. Super Scoopers. They're the water bombers.
Water bombers.
Cat guy. These
water
the
bombers.
water and bomb the fires. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
Good
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah, good one.
Good
Good one.
piece of PR. Good piece
Good
of
one,
PR.
yeah.
Good, yeah. The nomenclature was off, apparently. I'd adopted the nomenclature that was used on Fox News for reference. But yes, whole segment on them. Great PR in this moment, I think, for us. And I think also glad to help out our neighbors as we should. All right. That is another excellent episode of Hotel Pacifico. Thanks, Mike and Geoff. I want to thank our guest, Michael Goehring, our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and Fortis BC. We will see you next week, guests. BC, you can never leave.
Checkout time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.